Good morning. Welcome to the Science of Mind class here at CSLDallas. I'm Dr. Petra, and I am so happy that you're with us in the Zoom room live or on Facebook Live. And we are in the section on spiritual mind healing, talking about spiritual mind healing, which also absolutely applies to anything we want to manifest. And we went through a whole chapter on the power of thought. Now we're on a chapter of faith. Interesting to notice how those two have gone together. So if you want to ask a question, please don't forget that you can chat on Facebook Live, or you can chat in the Zoom room, or raise your hand. Love to have your comments, thoughts, or questions, sharings about this topic as we go along. So again, I want to frame the conversation that we're having, right? Spiritual mind healing is, we could also call it how to demonstrate, how to manifest. These are the laws of manifestation. And we fundamentally recognize that they work on physicality, on our bodies and on the physical universe around us. And so we are learning about that. So the power of thought, learning about how our thinking begins to create ideas and beliefs. And then the power of faith. And we had a big conversation last week about what faith actually means. Personally, I prefer the word trust. We talked about knowing, faith, trust, and knowing. And really recognizing that these words mean we so understand what we're doing that we trust that the idea that we have in mind and the work that we do with the creative process does actually manifest. We actually expect it to manifest. So as we're exploring this conversation about faith, of course, we quoted it last week. Somebody quoted it last week in one of the sharings. And the faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so we start with the idea that we have faith in something that hasn't yet manifested, right? We have a faith that it is manifesting, that it is going to appear. And we have faith in the process that we are using, the creative process, which rests on our whole understanding of the nature of reality and life and spirit, God, the force, and allowing ourselves to get into alignment with it and use it. So we're on page 159, Vitalizing Faith, for those of you who have your Science of Mind with you. So it starts out with these two sentences. In order to have faith, we must have a conviction that all is well. In order to keep faith, we must allow nothing to enter our thought which will weaken this conviction. So in order to have faith, we must have a conviction that all is well. So there's two pieces to that, right? The first is conviction. We spent a lot of time talking about that last week. The conviction is what gives us a trust and a knowing that we live in a spiritual universe, that there is a creative process that we can use, that life's trajectory is in fact for life, that there is an ongoing process of creation, and that we're a place where that is showing up as an awakened, self-aware being, and that we are now participating in that we can use that, right? Our conviction that all of that is true, which allows us to actually look at physical manifestations, which allows us to look at the human condition and say, while the human condition is roiling like a storm across the ocean, actually, in fact, all is well if we take into account the entire ocean and how unaffected 95% of the ocean is by the storm that's raging across the waves. And we liken the human condition to this storm that's raging across the top of this, across the surface. And because we recognize that human conditions and the physical world is the outpicturing the effect of this oceanic reality of the spiritual nature of life itself. So we must have a conviction that all is well, that eventually the storm passes, that eventually the waves do calm again, that eventually there is movement, and that the ultimate outcome is always towards life. From the universe's point of view, from spirit's, the impulse of spirit, the universe is always moving toward more life. So we have the conviction that all is well, that in the universal scheme of things, that in the ultimate scheme of reality, there is movement that is towards life. In order to keep faith, we must allow nothing to enter our thought which will weaken this conviction. Mary Baker Eddy says we have to stand guard at the portals of our mind and pay attention to what enters in. And of course, part of what enters in is simply the information from our physical senses, which tells us we're separate, which tells us that people get sick and die, which tells us that life is hard, which tells us that this is a real experience that we can't do anything about, right? And that exacerbates our sense of separation. And so we have to allow nothing to enter our thought which will weaken this conviction. The conviction that we live in a spiritual universe, that we are engaged in the co-creative process, and that the trajectory of life is actually for more life, for good. Faith is built upon belief, acceptance, and trust, right? A belief that this is true, an acceptance that this is actually how reality works, and a trust that it is unfolding in that direction. And of course, sometimes that's challenging, isn't it? Sometimes that's really challenging if we look around the world today in the pandemic, or just in our own lives, if there's something that really has come up that we feel like we're struggling with. That is the challenge, right? Is to stay convinced, to trust the process, to trust the outcome, and that we actually have to participate in that. We can't just sit back and go, okay, lay it on me, right? We actually have to hold our consciousness unweakened in our conviction and belief. Do you see that? That's our part. Our part is that clear, over and over and over again, coming back to that clear place where we say, no, I actually trust that this is what's happening. Even though the evidence might seem different in any particular moment. Our mind must be steady in its conviction that our life is some part of God, and that the Spirit is incarnated in us. Right? This is the conviction. Not that some other human being is going to do it right, not that somehow we can design the steps to an outcome, not that we can force our way into it. Our conviction is that we are a part of life, and life is a part of us, that we're a part of the universe is a part of us, that we're a part of this creative process, and that creative process is a part of us. This is the conviction that we hold, and we call that our faith. Having that faith, even in the midst of appearances, conditions, reality, the human experience of loss or overwhelm or change, all of those things that maybe cause us to feel frightened or uncertain or on shaky ground. So let's stop there for a minute before we go any further and see what comments, sharings, questions we might have.
All right, and once again, my name is Ryan, and I just want to remind everybody that if you're joining us watching live on Facebook, you can always join in the interactive Zoom room by hitting in the link in the description above. And would anybody like to raise their hand over here in the Zoom room? Questions, comments?
So while you guys are thinking about that, Ryan will let me know if somebody's raised their hand. We're going to go on to this next statement, right? Because we've just set the context for our conversation this morning. So the next statement, affirmations and denials are for the purpose of vitalizing faith, for the purpose of converting thought to a belief in things spiritual. Affirmations and denials are for the purpose of vitalizing faith, right? What resets us in our trust in the universe? What reignites our own conviction in the reality of the spiritual universe and that things are working out? We use our affirmations and denials. So let's talk about that, right? Because we use our affirmations and denials in our affirmative prayer. We call it spiritual mind treatment. And we use them just in general in the daily routine of our living as we are confronted with things, either things that we're not so happy about or things that we want to manifest and things that we want to grow. So affirmations, right? What are we doing? We are affirming spiritual truth. Now, it's really important to recognize that in our affirmations, we're not affirming something we hope to be true. We're not affirming something we wish is true. We're saying our affirmation because there's something within us that believes that it's true, that knows that it's true. So we are looking for our ability to remind ourselves of universal and spiritual truth. Now, for me personally, when I do affirmations, especially when I'm working in my spiritual mind treatments, my affirmations are always resting on one of two things. One, spiritual statements and spiritual principles that I have learned over the course of my spiritual study, that I have also had either an intuitive sense of their truth or actually an experience of their truth. So things like there is a creative process, there is a law of attraction, there is a law of circulation. Principle is not bound by precedent. The universe is always doing something new. The idea that life is actually for good. The trajectory of life is always for more life. That there is a cause and effect experience between the spiritual reality and the physical reality, right? These are fundamental truths of the spiritual universe. And so the work is affirming these things really in the face of our human evidence that our senses bring us of our separation and of our limited reality within just the physical universe. Like this is that the universe only works according to physical laws. So using our affirmations to reset ourselves in what we know, or at least to believe to be truth. So I want to state it again. We don't affirm things so that they'll be true. Rather, it's because they're true, we can affirm them. And so our affirmation really is a reminder. It is remembering some deep spiritual truth that we know, that we have experienced, or that we intuitively resonate with in some deep and profound way. And the more that we affirm it, right, we're actually using neuroscience to help recreate a way of thinking about life that embeds us in those truths rather than in our limited experiences through our human senses. All right, we'll stop there. Ryan, I see that we have something to share.
Yeah, well, I don't know which one it is, so I'm just going to say the Fritzes. You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, Jeff and Karen.
Hi, good morning. No, Ryan, you I think you have a shot at some stand-up if you took it.
That's
so
what I do on
was
the weekend,
listening.
Jeff. Thank you.
You're welcome. I didn't give you time to thank me, ladies. All right. So I was thinking about the metaphor and the the storm covering a small percentage of the ocean, and comparing that to kind of our human condition or what we observe. And what was coming to me is that we do trust our senses remarkably, given the fact that we can only see about 0.5% of all the light that there is.
Right.
And so thinking about that, our experience is really so limited, and it's tilted in the direction of what is going wrong, because that's actually what we're looking for, having this long evolution of having to protect ourselves and be safe.
Yes.
So I think it really does kind of press us to shift our consciousness in the direction that we often talk about, which is to look for the good, and in looking for the good, to praise it, to state it, to see it, to claim it, and realize that we have a tendency to really just remember most often the toughest lessons that we have experienced. Yet so much of what really will shift our consciousness comes from this ability to look for what we ordinarily through our senses would not see.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Jeff. You're so right. And that's the work that we're doing on the physical level of our brain, right? And neuroscience tells us all of this, that our brains are designed to look for threat, exactly as you said, to keep us secure. And that's the evolutionary process and the evolutionary legacy that we have from our physical evolution. And yet we have the capability of deciding that instead of constantly watching for threats, we can do exactly what you say, look for the good. And look for the evidence of things hoped for, right? That's what faith is. And our belief that it's actually there, allows us to look away from the threat and towards the good. And of course, as we start looking for it, sure enough, it's there. We begin to see it. We begin to see, and we begin to show ourselves that, yes, actually life is for life. And it's really, really interesting. I mean, when we had a conversation last Wednesday for Earth Day, right? We see this in the idea that out of evolution came this big idea about the survival of the fittest, and it's all tooth and claw, and it's all competition, and people are, and animals are competing for territory, and they're competing for resources and all of this sort of thing. But as we moved into the environmental, looking at things as an environment, not as individual species, a lion or a particular tree or a particular single entity, and we began to look at ecosystems and environments, an entirely different story emerged. And the story that emerged was that an ecosystem, an environment, is actually it's a whole system. And there is tremendous cooperation in that system to keep things in balance, to keep things in harmony, so that life will grow. Right? It's only when we focus on one individual thing, oh, that lion ate that gazelle, oh, that wolf ate that deer baby, when we think, oh, that's the tooth and claw. But we recognize that without the wolf, the deer take over, and they overgraze, and they actually make a mess. And so these things, this whole sense of balance and harmony, trees cooperate with each other, the microbes cooperate with the soil to make beautiful soil in which things grow. We see a very different story, but do you see it? It is all in how we look. I think that is a beautiful comment that you made, Jeff. It's all in how we look at it and what we are looking for and what part of our brain we are looking from. Very, very good. Okay, Ryan, I saw your hand. There must be another comment.
Yes, I'm going to pull into the room Sandra Francis. Sandra, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, Sandra.
Oh, sure. Thank you. I was just, I just made a comment based on something you said just a few minutes ago about how grateful I am for others' support when my conviction falters, and also grateful for the opportunity to support others.
Yes.
You ran Michael's song "Angels" with just one wing, and that and this. What you're speaking about this morning really reminds me of that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yay. Thank you, Sandra. And how important that is, right? That we get to lean into each other's faith. We get to lean into each other's belief. And of course, that's why we have a spiritual community. That's why we come together. That's why we have licensed spiritual coaches to help with that. When our faith is shaky, to actually allow ourselves to lean in on somebody else's faith. And then, of course, to return the favor is a really powerful thing, right? And so that's the affirmative side of our spiritual work. When we're doing manifestation work or spiritual mind healing work, that's the affirmative side. We're going to go on to talk about denials, but I see that we have another comment.
So it's good for all to have their own personal affirmations, but can that really affect the race consciousness, Petra?
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk about that. Did you have another comment? No. Okay. So let's talk about that. So what is race consciousness? Well, Carl Jung called it the collective unconscious. And Edgar Cayce called it the Akashic Records. Ernest Holmes calls it universal subjective mind. These are all terms for the idea that there is a shared field in which we are embedded, right? And that in that shared field, so we can think about the idea that yes, I have my own embedded thoughts and past patterns and tapes that run in the background. Right? Beliefs that have been laid down in my brain. Neuroscience tells us that they are the synaptic pathways, and that our brains, that our thoughts tend to like synaptic pathways that they're used to, right? Which is what causes us to fall into habits of thinking about things. But there is so much evidence that there's not just our own individual thinking. Think about the atmosphere of a family. Some families seem to be happy. Other families seem to constantly be in tension. Some families feel as though life is pretty effortless, maybe, regardless of the circumstances of life. So there is an atmosphere, and it's a shared experience, right? You can walk into a business or a community or a nation and you can feel a cultural consciousness. So these are all representations of this sort of nesting from individual consciousness into group consciousness into the consciousness of the human race as a whole. And so we understand that all of that is in a field, a unified field, a field of consciousness, a universal mind. It's been called in metaphysics. The scientists are now calling it the consciousness of the universe itself, right? And so when we are contributing, when we are having our thoughts, you have to think about this. They don't just stay right here. They don't. We're thinking and experiencing and feeling into this field of consciousness, which is why it's so important, because our energy is the product of that field of consciousness. Those two things energetically go together, and we are contributing to the consciousness as a whole. We might ask ourselves, what are we contributing? And what are we contributing lift? Are we contributing possibility? Are we contributing faith? Or are we contributing fear and contraction and ain't it awful and oh my gosh and this is never going to work? Right? Because there's this collective experience that we're all a part of. And it's not just in the realm of the experience of reality, it's the actual condition of consciousness itself. Ryan.
Yeah, I wanted to bring Connie into the room. Connie, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, Connie.
Going once.
Are you there, Connie? There she is.
Thank you. I was flipping around. Well, I had a very interesting experience yesterday, Dr. Petra. I was doing self-study as a teacher at whatever college I'm teaching at, Richland College. We have to do ongoing self-study. It's internet-based. And I was doing a program on hacking. And I was so amazed. There are all these different kinds of hacking, phishing, smishing, wishing,
right.
All the stuff. And it went one after another, after another, after another, and I started to plummet. Like, what in the world happened to personal integrity? Why are these people doing this? How can I, find a way to honor them and find love for them as human beings? So that's my question, and I had to really do something to bring myself up out of that. That was big.
Yeah. Thank you, Connie. That's a great question, and it leads us directly into the conversation about denials. When we use an affirmation and we say the spiritual truth that love is present, that life is unfolding for good, right? And then we're confronted with something that really doesn't look like that. And so your example is a perfect example, right? We do not deny the reality that that's happening. That would be putting our head in the sand. And in metaphysics and the science of mind, we do not check our intelligence at the door. So we're not pretending that something isn't happening, nor do we explain it away. Sometimes I think we over-rationalize things psychologically. And so we say, they must have this, they must have that. We tend to rationalize it, and we want to find some human compassion for them, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it's not spiritual denial. Spiritual denial says there is nothing in the universe that is holding that kind of belief or behavior in place. So what that means is there's no force that's causing bad things to happen. So there's no devil, there's no dark force. Light and dark aren't contending against themselves. We aren't battling against evil. And there's nothing in the universe, in the spiritual truth, that is holding that in place. That is our spiritual denial. And we do that for things that we see, like that kind of activity. We do that for a diagnosis, a medical diagnosis. We do that when we look at our finances and we see that our income has perhaps plummeted, right? And we recognize that that is actually not in alignment with spiritual reality. Therefore, it's not being held in place by universal truth. Well, anything that's not held in place by universal truth, the moment that we stop giving it attention and we stop giving it life, it must fade, because there's nothing in the ongoing consciousness of life itself that's holding it in place. And so I have found myself in the last, maybe number of years, really focusing on when I see things like that. I see environmental destruction, I see businesses or corporations or governments behaving in ways that seem counterintuitive to the ongoing support of life itself on this planet. My denial is that's not the truth of humanity. This is not the truth of our spiritual nature. This is not the truth of who we are. And I affirm that we are awakening. I affirm that we are seeing the outcome of those kinds of choices, and that they don't ultimately actually create more life. They create chaos and destruction. And so they cannot be part of spiritual truth and spiritual reality. And so that something else is holding that in place. And what's that but our free will and our ability to choose things that look like they are expedient in the short term, but are not about being for life in the long term. And people get to do that. And we get to say, no, that's not okay. And we get to put them in jail, or there gets to be consequences when people are caught doing things that are illegal or, or inappropriate. But that's the double-edged sword of being self-aware people, self-aware beings that actually have free will. We can, in fact, use our abilities for things that are harmful. But the moment that we release our attention to that, or the moment that we stop doing that, the harm stops moving forward, right? We're constantly affirming the realignment, the reawakening, and the outpicturing of spiritual truth. And so this is where our denial comes in. And so we can look at stuff like that. I actually noticed that we have here at CSLDallas been experiencing a little bit of a cyber attack over the last, few weeks. And thank you, Ryan and Shane, for doing amazing work around all of that. And I noticed that at one point I was like, why does everybody always have to ruin everything? And then we were Zoom bombed, right? The reason we're not using Zoom meeting where you can see everybody on these Science of Mind classes, and have had to go to webinars so that somebody can't get in and start showing pornography or ads or, racial slurs and this. They were Zoom bombing, and I had 2 days. I just was like pouting. Like, why do people have to ruin stuff all the time? And I thought, wait. That is affirming that there's something fundamentally wrong with us as human beings. And I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I know for a fact that we are ultimately all radiant beings of love and light. That is our spiritual truth. And so I deny that there's anything in life itself causing humanity to be less than its best. That the truth is we are all growing in that direction, and that life itself is lifting us, and that our consciousness is growing. And the more that we look for the good, the more that we see how much good people are doing in the world, right? That shifts that whole feeling for me. And I get to see, So these are some people who simply believe that life isn't for them, and that they have to somehow scratch and scrape to get their good. And in that moment, I can truly have compassion and say, and I know that life's good is right there where they are too, and that they can have it in a way that is in alignment. But as long as people don't know that, I certainly in my own life have had moments where I didn't know that, and quite frankly behaved poorly, right? We've all done that. We've behaved poorly when we had moments when we didn't know that we were supported by the universe, that we live in an abundant universe, that there is good to be had for everybody. And that causes us to then decide we have to behave differently. And so this is where our affirmations and denials come into place. I affirm what I know to be true, what I believe to be spiritually true about humanity and about each and every single human being. And I deny that there's anything, what do we want to say, permanent or essential about behaviors that aren't in alignment with that. Those behaviors are simply the outpicturing of ignorance and false beliefs and a deep belief in separation and therefore the difficult nature of life itself. But none of those things are true. Those are not spiritually true. So do you see that we are constantly working with our affirmations and denials to find that place to stand, so that when you read stuff like that, you don't have to plummet, you don't have to take it on, and we can find a way to move forward. Great question, Connie. Thank you for bringing that up. Ryan, did I see your hand for a comment?
Well, first of all, I just want to apologize to Connie for all the emails I've been sending to you, but I really just want you to play Candy Crush. But yes, Peter, to your point, we actually have a couple questions, and then I have somebody who wants to ask you a question.
Great.
So I'll start with the first question from Bobby. She asked, how does race consciousness relate to Emerson's Oversoul?
That's a great question, Bobby. So it doesn't really, right? Race consciousness is the aggregate of the individual's experience. It's the aggregate of human experience, right? And so we would call that, as I said, the most common non-New Thought term is Carl Jung's collective unconscious, right? The Oversoul, Emerson's Oversoul, is actually his attempt to speak about the infinite spiritual reality of life without defining it as a being, as a God out there, a deity with shape and definition. Right? And so he also says this wonderful thing. He says there's no bar or window where our soul ends and the Oversoul begins. Right? Because we are actually individualized expressions of the divine. So in Science of Mind, we, instead of using the term soul, we use the term spirit. So there's universal spirit, and there's the individualized spirit, which is the I that I am. And these two things are actually the same. One is the universal expression of life as an intentional reality, a causal reality, and the other is an individualized expression of life as an intentional, self-aware, causal reality. And so the continuum of soul and oversoul, right, is about our essential nature, about the essential nature of life itself and the fabric of consciousness. Race consciousness, or the collective unconscious, Rupert Sheldrake calls it the morphogenetic field, is basically the energetic field of thoughts and experiences that coalesce around the species, that become a field in the field, right? Lynn Twist calls it the field. The quantum, we could call it the quantum field, the matrix. Right? That's the less personal experience of the Oversoul, which, again, as I said, has to do with the essential nature of the fabric of reality itself. But within that fabric, then I don't know, what's a good analogy? We could think of clouds, like clouds of thoughts and feelings and experiences that have coalesced around a species, and that are contained within the field. And we are, if we're not careful, right, we just live inside that cloud. Just like, think about it, you live inside the cloud of your family. So you go home for Christmas, and what? You're 12 again, right? You instantly take the place in your family that you always had, right? And everybody treats everybody the way that they did while we were all growing up together. And that, because that's the consciousness, the field of consciousness that has been created in that family. And we unconsciously just like fall right back into it. but that has nothing to do with our inherent, essential truth, the I amness that we are. Do you see? So they're actually two separate things. And yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Ryan, thanks, Bobby.
All right, so I'm going to call in Shauna, and then I have one more question for you.
Great, thanks.
So Shauna, can you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, Shauna.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, affirmations and denial and demonstrations. I had a realization this week that every day is practice for me now. That this is a huge field of practice for me.
Right.
And the first step is just me observing.
Yes.
I realized this week twice, I just got reminded, and I realized I'm getting reminded every moment, but 2 times. One with my son, who I love and adore, but he's a deep analytical and, like super smart and super analytical, and he's been reading so much stuff, and, a lot of it is a negative.
Right.
And we love to discuss books and stuff, but there's a flood coming in for him, and the financial markets and all of that. And then the other one was a group of dear women that we started having virtual dinner meetings with every Tuesday, and we to support, and we have a group text.
Right.
And I was realizing in both cases, the discussions were sucking all of us away from my conviction.
Yes.
And so, and I was participating, right, with, stupid, funny songs about Trump, or talking about, the financial markets being like 1929. And I was like, first I observed it, and then I started experimenting. And I hadn't used your language, and now I'm going to really more consciously use your language of denial and affirmation. But what I realized as you talked this morning is I observed it, I denied it to myself, I affirmed it, and then what I did with both my son and my friends as practice is I didn't make a big deal about it. I just sent something beautiful.
Yes.
Like I sent Alicia Keys' beautiful song.
Right.
Or I talked to my son about, do we really think the capital system as we knew it has been good for everybody anyway? What if we, evolve that to a world where everybody, and what I learned, Dr. Petra, is how easily people embrace a different way of thinking, because we're all tired of the negativity.
Yes.
But sometimes we don't know this when we're doing it. And you and I had a wonderful moment this week when I was deep in my ditch, and you simplified it and took me back to where I needed to go. And so I'm not doing it well every day.
Right.
But every day, I think I'm getting better at observing when I'm sliding.
Beautiful.
But now I'm going to more proactively use your language, or CSL's language, because I think it's, powerful words. Observing, and in the observation, I guess I want to add, loving myself, not beating myself up.
Yes. Good.
Then denying, I guess, will be the next step, right? Is that right? And
right.
Then back to my powerful affirmation of how I'm convicted.
Yes. Beautiful. That's
practicing a lot.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Shauna. That's awesome, and I think that's really true, right? I think our opportunity to practice our spirituality has been vastly accelerated. at this point in time and everything that's going on. And I have to admit, I'm hugely grateful for COVID-19 in this moment, because I think this is tremendous practice that we are getting to have as we approach the very real challenge of climate change. And we are, every single day, we're getting to practice. Do we become apathetic? Do we withdraw into our shell and just decide we're going to let the world do whatever it wants to do because there's nothing we can do anyway? Do we feel ourselves to be victimized by it? Do we go into the hole? Do we think it's so awful that nothing's ever going to change? Or do we actually do exactly the process that you described? Which is why we have, in addition to spiritual mind treatment, we have the practices of meditation and visioning and paying attention to our thinking. All of these practices coalesce into a way of living our lives. And every single day, every day, there are opportunities for grist for our spiritual mill. What do I believe? Do I really believe I live in a spiritual universe? Do I really believe that life ultimately is unfolding for life? Do I really believe that there is a way of using the creative process that awakens humanity? Do I really believe that I can contribute to that? Right? Every day we are having the opportunity to confront that. And sometimes I think that we have, I'm going to so get myself in trouble now. I'm going to say this out loud. So I apologize to anybody I offend. Sometimes I think we are overly invested in our feelings about things, and then the thoughts that we have about those feelings. We want to feel our feelings and feel our humanity and feel our, and all of that. And yes, of course, we don't want to suppress it, and we don't want to pretend that it's not there. But we also don't want it to run us. We don't want to be run by our sadness, disappointment, anger, frustration, right? We have to feel the feeling, let it up, let it out, and then we have to decide, no, that's not where I'm going to stand. That's not how I'm going to engage with life. I am going to find myself back in my affirmative point of view. I am going to walk myself back to spiritual truth. And that, as you said, Shauna, is practice over and over and over again. And every time we practice that, do you see, we are building not only those new grooves in our own brain, rewiring our own brain, but we're literally contributing that to collective consciousness, to this universal, this collective unconscious, this race consciousness that we are part of. We are over and over and over and over again, instead of going to fight or flight, protection, I've got to get mine before you get yours, whatever all of that is, we're actually demonstrating in consciousness what it looks like and feels like to drag ourselves out of that and into an affirmative expectation for good. And what we know beyond the shadow of a doubt is every time we do that, we are using the universal law of cause and effect in that way. We're re-engaging with an affirmative cause, because we know what we focus on grows. And when we focus on how afraid we are, and we focus on how horrible it is, and we focus on all the negativity, we are contributing to growing it. Again, I want to be very clear. This does not mean we don't feel our feelings, but we cannot allow them to be then the place from which we operate. And it is through affirmations and observing, and then affirmations and denials, that we move ourselves to a place where we are grounded in this conviction that this is the place we want to stand, this is the spiritual truth we understand, and we are going to, by hook or by crook, bring ourselves back to that place. Because that's how we want to create our own lives, and that's what we want to contribute to consciousness. And so thank you, Shauna, for sharing that, right? Every day is grist for our spiritual mill right now. Every single day. And the more that we do that, the more we contribute. Ryan, I saw your hand. We must have another comment.
Well, I'd just like to say that I'm feeling offended that you want me to feel my feelings, Petra. So, while I go work on my grist for my spiritual mill, I'm going to leave you with another question.
Okay, great.
And this question comes from Dawn. Shout out to Dawn, and I might butcher this, but let me read it. It says, some of the spiritual leaders talk about going into the Akashic
Records.
That's what I was going to say.
Uh-huh.
They talk about going to the Akashic Record to remove our personal blocks. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I don't actually do Edgar Cayce's work, right? The Akashic Records come out of Edgar Cayce's work, and that's the name that he gave to the universal collective, the collective unconscious that Carl Jung talked about. And he likened it to a series of hallways and rooms in which paintings are hung, and it is simply the storehouse of everything that's ever been thought, felt, or experienced by the human race. And those things that have coalesced around a thought or a belief or an idea become a painting that hangs in the hallway, right? And so you can literally, if you do that kind of work, you can walk down the hallway and you can see what's in the collective unconscious and learn from it. So in the science of mind, we would say that really what you're doing is you are literally using both your spiritual tools and your neuroscience tools to rewrite the programming in your own mind, to rewrite the programming in your own consciousness, to build new synaptic pathways that are in alignment with the spiritual truth that is the I that I am, the you that you are, right, that is rewriting those programs, and or perhaps actually uninstalling programs so that the fundamental programs of the essential self of who we are can actually emerge. I mean, we all come with operating systems installed, right? And those operating systems that are installed are love, connection, trust, a knowingness of how the universe works, a ability to use the creative process. These are the fundamentally installed operating systems that come as individualized expressions of the one who have chosen to show up in human form at this time in this place. And what gets written over top of that are all the beliefs and ideas about life that get written down, that right over that, programs that are running out of the current memory of this life experience that tells us we're separate and life is solid and we can't do anything about it, and all the beliefs and things that we have received from our families and from our culture. And so the work that we're doing is in our own consciousness. Now, I think that you should do metaphorically that work any way that works for you. So the Akashic Records, we have to remember that that's a metaphor that Edgar Cayce used to get a hold of his ability to wander around in race consciousness and pull information out of it. And so he organized that for himself in his mind as this idea of the Akashic Records. And he wasn't the first person who used that, right? And so we can organize that in whatever metaphor works for us. For me personally, I use a lot of metaphors from nature. There's so much about the way in which nature operates and the way in which the natural world, and I guess because I'm an environmentalist from a long time ago, there's something about all of that helps me engage in my own spiritual practice and spiritual growth. And it helps me unlock where I'm blocked, where I don't believe something that I say I believe, or I'm actually not acting or operating in alignment with a belief that I say I believe. So I use tons and tons of examples and experiences of nature. And so we all have to find those systemic metaphors that help us do this work. And ultimately the work is done in consciousness. And it's done in that collective consciousness as well as our own individual consciousness. So whether you do it in the Akashic Records or you do it in some other way through energy or rebirthing or therapy or spiritual work or meditation, right? These are all methodologies that are all kind of doing the same thing. Unpacking the old programming, unpacking and releasing the old programming so that the fundamental essential truth about who we are can be revealed and we can live our lives based on that. And until that revelation has completely happened, right, the difference between while some of these old overlaid programs are running and this essential programming comes to the forefront, right? This disconnect, that's our walk in faith. That's our walk in faith. Which one are we giving more credibility to? Our old programming might, and our view of the world and our getting sucked into negativity and our fear and all of that can seem very, very, very real. And the walk in faith is, are we able to, just to do the work of observing, denying, affirming, and bringing that essential truth back into our consciousness so that it becomes the place we stand and the place from which we operate. Ryan.
Yeah, I have somebody who has a question. Scott, do you want to go ahead and just unmute yourself?
Hi, Scott.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, so I keep coming to this thought that, this is a giant wake-up call that our planet is sending us.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've had earlier wake-up calls, and they keep getting louder because we're not waking up planetarily. So how does that, I kind of feel like my thinking is very Machiavellian, that... And I don't want to feel that way, but I kind of feel like it's a cry for help from our planet. From this whole ecosystem is crying out, there's something broken here, it needs to be addressed. How does the spiritual mind or the science of mind relate to that?
Well, Scott, I think you're saying something really, really, really important, right? Our lives will continue to reflect the thoughts and beliefs that are predominant. And I don't know about you, but I have suffered from the universal 2x4. Right? When I had little nudges along the way, maybe this isn't the best possible way for you to be behaving. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should be seeing, something different. Maybe this relationship isn't as good for me as I thought. Maybe I shouldn't be distracting myself with drugs and alcohol. Maybe I shouldn't, right? And I have these little niggling things that say, but I'm in the pattern and I'm in the way and I'm just moving and and then it gets louder and louder and then all of a sudden you have an accident or then you have this or then you have that and pretty soon it feels like and with the universal 2x4, it's that wake up call, right? And in the 12 steps they call it rock bottom. And sometimes, unfortunately, in our own personal lives, we aren't doing what Shauna said every day, using it as spiritual practice. And so we just sort of put our blinders on, or maybe we don't know, or we're just enmeshed in the old programming. Well, if that's the case, the universe is neither punishing us for it or trying to teach us a lesson, right? What's happening is the creative process. That which we focus on, think about how we organize life in our own minds and what we believe about it is what is going to be played out on the screen of physicality. And it is going to reflect whatever's going on in our consciousness. This is exactly what we teach on the individual level of learning about manifestation, right? And Scott, as you so beautifully have pointed out, the 2x4 here, the universal 2x4 on the scale of humanity is getting bigger and bigger. We are seeing the outpicturing of what it looks like when, as a human race, we have some predominant ideas about life and about, you know, what's important, and about how we move forward, and about our relationship to each other and the planet, right? We are seeing that played out. And the universe is simply reflecting back to us that which we have held in that collective consciousness. The good news is that, in fact, more and more people are waking up. More and more people have, in the last 50 to 100 years, said maybe there's a different way. Maybe there are better ways. Maybe there are ways in which we can actually learn from what we are seeing and making new choices, which means we have new beliefs, which means we have a new understanding about life itself, right? And that's what we have to focus on. We have to focus on the possibility, the opportunity, and the demonstration of this awakening, right? And that's the faith we get to walk in each and every day as we move through this. Yeah, so let us wake up. We don't need any more 2x4s. And the planet doesn't need to give us a 2x4. We don't need any more 2x4s. We need to simply continue to do our walk in faith. So I just invite you to continue to read this section. We're talking about vitalizing faith. And boy, lots of life today is vitalizing our faith every single day. We have the opportunity to see where we stand and to do this work. So we're here to do the work together. Thanks for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you in the Sunday celebration in just a few minutes, Facebook Live or Zoom. We love having you at the Sunday celebration, and we have the Q&A and our licensed spiritual coaches afterwards. So enjoy your morning, enjoy your day. I miss seeing you in person, but I'm so glad you're here with me today. Bye for now.